The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Ashford family townhouse on Fifth Avenue, each drop a sharp reminder that even in the heart of Manhattan's elite district, nature cared nothing for wealth or status. Inside, Alexander Ashford III stood motionless before those same windows, his reflection ghostly against the storm-darkened glass. His jaw was set in that familiar hard line that society photographers had captured 100 times, the expression that made debutantes whisper nervously behind their fans, and businessmen choose their words carefully in his presence. "Alexander, darling, you're not even listening." The voice belonged to Catherine Vandermeer, daughter of railroad magnates, educated in Switzerland, and widely considered the most eligible woman in New York society. She sat on the leather sofa behind him, her posture perfect despite her obvious frustration. The enormous diamond engagement ring on her finger caught the lamplight as she twisted it absently, a nervous habit she'd developed over the past 3 months. "I heard every word," Alexander replied without turning. His voice carried that particular quality that made people uncertain whether he was bored or dangerous. "Your mother wants the wedding at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Your father insists on a reception for 500 guests. You're concerned about the color of the bridesmaids' dresses. Then why won't you look at me?" He finally turned, and Catherine felt that familiar chill she'd never quite gotten used to. Alexander Ashford was undeniably handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that he kept meticulously styled, and sharp features that belonged on Roman statuary, but his eyes were what people remembered, gray, cold, and utterly unreadable. At 32, he'd already built a reputation that preceded him into every room, brilliant in business, ruthless in negotiations, and completely incapable of genuine warmth. "I'm looking at you now," he said evenly. Catherine stood, smoothing her expensive dress with trembling hands. "This isn't working, Alexander. You know it isn't. We've been engaged for 3 months, and you've never once looked at me the way a man should look at his future wife. You've never even—" She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. "We've never even shared more than a polite kiss goodnight. We have an understanding," Alexander said, moving to the sideboard where crystal decanters held amber liquid. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch despite the early hour. "Our families benefit from this union. You'll have the Ashford name and all that comes with it. I'll have your father's railroad connections. It's a sound arrangement." "An arrangement?" Catherine's voice cracked slightly. "Alexander, I'm not a business merger. I'm a woman who foolishly thought that perhaps, given time, you might actually feel something for me. Anything at all." He took a long drink, feeling the familiar burn that never quite reached the numbness inside him. "I told you from the beginning what this was. I was honest about my limitations." "Your limitations," she repeated bitterly. "That's what you call it. Every woman in New York society has a story about you, Alexander, about how you court them beautifully, say all the right things, but there's nothing behind it. No fire, no passion, no real connection. They call you the Duke because you're as cold and distant as English royalty. Some say you're incapable of love. Others say you simply choose not to feel." Alexander set down his glass with a sharp click. "And yet you said yes when I proposed." "I thought I could be different," Catherine whispered. "I thought perhaps I could be the one to reach whatever heart you have buried under all that ice." She pulled the engagement ring from her finger, the movement decisive despite her obvious pain. "I was wrong. I won't marry a man who looks at me like I'm a column in a ledger book." She placed the ring on the table between them, and for the briefest moment something flickered across Alexander's face. Not quite relief, not quite regret, but something in that gray territory between. "Your family will be disappointed," he said quietly. "Let them be disappointed. I'd rather face their anger than spend my life trying to earn affection from a man who doesn't know how to give it." Catherine gathered her coat and gloves. At the door she paused. "I hope someday you figure out what made you this way, Alexander, and I genuinely hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, because whatever it isn't me." The door closed with a soft click that echoed louder than a slam. Alexander stood alone in the vast room, surrounded by the trappings of inherited wealth, oil paintings of stern ancestors, furniture that cost more than most people earned in a year, Persian rugs that muffled every footstep. The silence was complete except for the rain. He didn't move to stop Catherine, didn't feel the urge to chase after her or apologize or promise to change. He felt nothing but that familiar emptiness that had become so constant he barely noticed it anymore. They were right. All of them. He was ice, straight through. The war had seen to that, and what the war had started, his family had finished. His eyes drifted to the framed photograph on the mantel, the only personal item he kept visible. A young man in military uniform, smiling in a way Alexander couldn't remember ever feeling. That had been another lifetime, before the trenches in France, before watching his closest friend die in his arms, before coming home to find his younger brother had drunk himself to death unable to cope with their father's cruelty, before he'd learned that feeling, anything at all was simply too dangerous. The telephone on his desk rang sharply, cutting through his thoughts. "Mr. Ashford." His secretary's efficient voice came through. "Your mother called again. She's insisting you come to Newport for the summer season. She says the house is ready and the staff is in place. She's quite adamant that you need to escape the city's heat and recent social complications." Of course, his mother already knew about Catherine. The New York Society gossip network moved faster than telegraph wires. "Tell her I'll arrive Friday," Alexander said, already calculating what business matters he'd need to settle before leaving the city. "Very good, sir." "Oh, and sir, she mentioned she's hired several new staff members. She thought a change in household personnel might be refreshing." Alexander hung up without responding. His mother's refreshing changes usually meant she was meddling, trying to fix what she considered his broken social life, as if a different butler or cook would somehow transform him into the charming son she wished he'd remained. 3 days later, Alexander's private car pulled up the circular drive of the Ashford summer estate in Newport, Rhode Island. The mansion, they called it a cottage with typical wealthy understatement, sprawled across manicured lawns that rolled down toward the Atlantic Ocean. Built during the Gilded Age by his grandfather, it was a monument to excess. 40 rooms, marble imported from Italy, and enough servants' quarters to house a small army of staff. The ocean wind carried salt spray and the cry of gulls as Alexander stepped from the car. He'd always preferred Newport to the city during summer. Here, at least, the empty grandeur felt appropriate. The vastness of sea and sky matched the hollowness inside him. "Mr. Alexander? Welcome home, Mrs. Patterson." The head housekeeper bustled down the front steps. She'd been with the family for 20 years and was one of the few people who still tried to treat him with warmth, despite his reputation. "Your mother is taking tea on the terrace. She's eager to see you." Alexander nodded, allowing himself to be led through the familiar halls. The Newport house was different from the city townhouse, lighter, airier, with windows that let in the coastal sunshine, but it was still a cage, just a prettier one. His mother, Eleanor Ashford, sat with perfect posture at the terrace table overlooking the gardens. She was 60 but looked 10 years younger, maintained through expensive treatments and sheer force of will. Her smile was warm but calculating as Alexander bent to kiss her cheek. "Darling, you look terrible," she said with practiced concern. "The city is destroying you. I'm so glad you've come." Catherine returned the ring. Alexander said bluntly, pouring himself tea. "I assume you know. The whole city knows, dear. It's all anyone can talk about." Eleanor's tone suggested this pleased her more than it should. "She wasn't right for you anyway. Too soft, too conventional. You need someone with more spirit." "I don't need anyone. Everyone needs someone, Alexander. Even you, though you've convinced yourself otherwise." She studied him over her teacup. "I've made changes to the household staff. Fresh faces, new energy. I think you'll find it interesting." Before Alexander could respond to what was clearly a setup, Mrs. Patterson appeared in the terrace doorway. "Ma'am, there's been a small incident in the library. The new girl knocked over the Chinese vase while dusting." Eleanor's expression tightened with annoyance. "The Ming Dynasty vase? That's been in the family for—" "I'll handle it," Alexander said, standing abruptly. He preferred dealing with household crises to continuing his mother's transparent attempts at matchmaking. He found the library in controlled chaos, shards of pale blue porcelain scattered across the Persian rug, and kneeling among the wreckage, carefully gathering pieces with hands that shook slightly, was a young woman he'd never seen before. She was black, which itself was notable in a household that typically hired Irish or Italian immigrants for staff positions. She wore the standard maid's uniform, black dress, white apron, but something about the way she carried herself caught his attention. Even kneeling among broken pottery, there was a dignity to her posture, a careful control that suggested she was holding herself together by force of will. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said without looking up, her voice steady despite the trembling hands. "It was entirely my fault. I'll pay for the damage from my wages, however long it takes." Alexander stepped closer, glass crunching under his shoes. From this angle he could see her face, high cheekbones, full lips pressed tight with anxiety, and when she finally glanced up, eyes that were a remarkable deep brown, currently wide with apprehension. "Do you know what that vase was worth?" he asked, his tone neutral. "No, sir, but I imagine more than I'll earn in a year, maybe several years." She met his gaze directly, which surprised him. Most servants kept their eyes downcast around him. That doesn't change that I'm responsible for it. It was an accident. That doesn't make it less broken, sir. Something about her directness intrigued him. There was no simpering apology, no tears, just honest acknowledgement and a willingness to face consequences. It was refreshing. What's your name? Evelyn Carter, sir. How long have you worked here, Miss Carter? This is my 3rd day, sir. A flicker of resignation crossed her face. I suppose it will also be my last. Alexander studied the broken vase pieces she'd gathered. The truth was, he'd never liked that vase. His father had brought it back from China with the same attitude he brought to everything. Look what I can afford, look what I possess. It had always seemed cold and lifeless to him, just another expensive object in a house full of them. Mrs. Patterson? He called without taking his eyes off Evelyn. The housekeeper appeared instantly. Yes, Mr. Alexander. Have someone clean this up. Miss Carter will continue her duties. The vase was an accident, and she's acknowledged responsibility. That's sufficient. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly, but she simply nodded. Of course, sir. Evelyn stood slowly, and Alexander found himself noting details he normally wouldn't. She was perhaps 23 or 24, of average height, with a graceful way of moving despite her obvious nervousness. But it was her eyes that held his attention. They showed intelligence, determination, and something else he couldn't quite name. Thank you, sir, she said quietly. I won't disappoint you. See that you don't, he replied, his tone returning to its usual coolness. This house has stood for 40 years. I expect things to remain intact during my stay. He turned to leave, dismissing her, but paused at the doorway. Miss Carter? Yes, sir. Why did my mother hire you? The question seemed to surprise her. I'm not sure I understand, sir. My mother typically hires through the same agencies she's used for decades. Irish girls, mostly. You're not the usual choice. Evelyn's expression became carefully neutral, but he saw the flash of something in her eyes. Anger, perhaps, or pain at having to explain what should be obvious. Mrs. Ashford's regular agency said they had no suitable candidates available. My employer, Mrs. Hartford, recommended me. I worked for her family for 3 years before they moved to Boston. Mrs. Ashford checked my references and found them satisfactory. She paused, then added with quiet dignity, If my work isn't acceptable, sir, I'll leave without complaint. That wasn't what I asked. No, sir. But it's the only answer that matters. Alexander found himself almost smiling. Not quite, but closer than he'd come in months. This young woman had courage. In a household where most of the staff either feared him or fawned over him, she met his questioning with honest directness. Carry on, Miss Carter, he said, and left the library. But as he walked through the corridors of the sprawling mansion, he found himself thinking about deep brown eyes that hadn't looked away, and hands that had trembled while gathering broken pieces but hadn't stopped working. There had been something in that brief encounter, a spark of genuine human connection that he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. It disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. That evening, as Alexander dressed for dinner, he found his thoughts returning to the incident in the library. This wasn't like him. He didn't think about the servants. They were part of the household machinery, invisible and interchangeable. Yet he couldn't stop wondering about Evelyn Carter's story, how she'd ended up in Newport, what she thought about as she dusted expensive objects in houses she'd never be able to afford. Dangerous thoughts, he told himself firmly, the kind that led nowhere good. But when he descended the stairs for dinner and caught a glimpse of her in the hallway, carefully carrying a silver tea service, he felt it again, that unexpected spark of interest, of curiosity, of something that felt dangerously close to actually feeling. For the first time in years, Alexander Ashford wondered if the ice inside him might not be as permanent as he'd believed, and the thought terrified him more than anything he'd faced in the trenches of France. Evelyn Carter had learned long ago that invisibility was a survival skill. In the grand houses where she'd worked since she was 16, the best servants were the ones nobody noticed, ghosts in black dresses and white aprons who appeared when needed and vanished when their tasks were complete. She'd perfected the art of moving through rooms without disturbing the air, of keeping her eyes downcast, of becoming part of the wallpaper. But Alexander Ashford made invisibility impossible. It had been 2 weeks since the incident with the vase, and in that time, Evelyn had become acutely aware of his presence in ways that made her deeply uncomfortable. Not because he was cruel, he wasn't. Not because he was demanding, he barely acknowledged the staff at all. But because every time she entered a room where he sat reading or working, she felt his eyes follow her movements with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. She told herself it meant nothing. Rich men looked at their servants all the time, usually with dismissive assessment or worse. But there was something different about the way Alexander Ashford watched her. It wasn't predatory or dismissive. It was curious, almost puzzled, as if she were a problem he couldn't solve. The feeling was mutual, though she'd never admit it aloud. "Evelyn, stop daydreaming and focus." Martha Washington, no relation to the president, she always clarified, nudged her elbow as they polished silver in the servants' dining room. Martha was 45, had worked in service since she was 12, and had taken Evelyn under her wing from day one. She was one of only 3 black staff members in the household, and her presence had been the main reason Evelyn had accepted the position. "I'm not daydreaming," Evelyn protested, attacking a tarnished spoon with renewed vigor. "Child, you've been polishing that same spoon for 5 minutes. Either you're daydreaming or you're in love with silverware, and I know which one I'm betting on." Martha's knowing look made Evelyn's cheeks warm. "And I also know who's got you distracted." "I don't know what you mean." "Mr. Alexander been watching you like a hawk watches a field mouse. Don't think I haven't noticed." Martha's voice dropped lower, taking on a serious tone that made Evelyn's stomach clench. "And don't think others haven't noticed either. You need to be careful, girl. Real careful." Evelyn set down the spoon, her hands suddenly cold despite the warm afternoon. "I haven't done anything wrong. I do my work. I stay out of the way. I know you do. But it doesn't matter what you do or don't do. What matters is what people think. And what people think can get you hurt in ways you don't want to imagine." Martha reached over and squeezed her hand. "I've seen this before. Rich white man takes an interest in a girl like us. Sometimes it's just curiosity that passes. Sometimes it's worse. Either way, we're the ones who pay the price." "He barely speaks to me," Evelyn said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. Alexander did speak to her. Brief exchanges about household matters, questions about whether she'd settled in well, a comment about a book she'd been caught reading during her break. Small things that probably meant nothing to him, but that she found herself replaying in her mind far too often. "Words aren't the only way men speak their interests," Martha said wisely. "You just remember, we're here to work and earn our keep, nothing more. Dreams about anything else will break your heart or worse." That conversation haunted Evelyn as she went about her afternoon duties. She knew Martha was right. She'd grown up in Baltimore, in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone's business, and where the stories of what happened to black women who caught the wrong kind of attention from white men were passed down like cautionary tales. Her own mother had warned her before she'd left for service. "Keep your head down, do your work, and don't let any man, black or white, think you're available for anything but honest labor." Evelyn had always followed that advice. She'd rejected the advances of the grocer's son back home, ignored the inappropriate comments from a previous employer's adult son, and maintained strict professional boundaries everywhere she'd worked. She had dreams, real dreams, of saving enough money to attend the teachers' college that had opened in Washington, D.C. for black students. She wanted to educate children who looked like her, to give them opportunities she'd had to fight for. Getting entangled with Alexander Ashford in any capacity would destroy all of that. So why did her heart beat faster every time she heard his footsteps in the hallway? The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the music room as Evelyn dusted the grand piano. This was one of her favorite rooms in the mansion, light and airy with instruments that spoke of artistry rather than just wealth. She'd taught herself to play basic melodies on an old upright piano at the church back home, and sometimes when she was certain she was alone, she'd touch the keys of this magnificent instrument, imagining what it would sound like played by skilled hands. Today she thought she was alone. The family was out, Mrs. Ashford at a society luncheon, Alexander supposedly riding horses on the beach. So when her fingers drifted to the keys and picked out a simple melody her mother used to sing, she didn't realize she had an audience. "You play." Evelyn spun around so fast she nearly knocked over her cleaning supplies. Alexander stood in the doorway, still in his riding clothes, watching her with that intense expression she'd come to recognize. "I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have. I was just—" She stumbled over the words, her professional composure crumbling. "You were playing," he interrupted, stepping into the room. "Don't apologize. I asked a question. Do you play piano?" "A little, sir. Nothing formal. Just simple things." She stepped away from the instrument, putting distance between herself and the evidence of her transgression. "Play something else." It wasn't a request. It was a command, but delivered in a tone that suggested curiosity rather than authority. Evelyn's mind raced. Every instinct told her to refuse politely, to return to her dusting, to maintain the proper boundaries between employer and servant. But something in his eyes, A genuine interest, maybe even loneliness, made her hesitate. "I don't read music, sir," she said carefully. "I only know what I've learned by ear." "Then play what you know by ear." Evelyn moved back to the piano with reluctant steps. Her hands shook slightly as she placed them on the keys. She chose a spiritual she'd learned in church, one that spoke of hope and freedom without being overtly religious. Her playing was simple, self-taught, lacking the sophistication that these keys deserved, but the melody was honest and heartfelt. When she finished, silence filled the room. She couldn't bring herself to look at Alexander, certain she'd somehow disappointed or offended him. "Where did you learn that?" His voice was closer now. He'd moved to stand beside the piano while she played. "Church, sir, back home in Baltimore. The choir director let me practice sometimes after services. It's beautiful. Simple, but beautiful." He paused. "You should have formal lessons. You have natural talent." Evelyn did look at him then, surprised by the compliment. "That's not possible, sir. People like me don't get piano lessons." "People like you." He repeated the words as if tasting them, finding them bitter. "You mean servants? Or do you mean something else?" The directness of the question shocked her. In all her years of service, no employer had ever acknowledged the unspoken reality of race so bluntly. Most preferred to pretend it didn't exist, that the divisions in society were purely about class and employment. "Both, sir," she answered honestly, meeting his gaze. "In my world, they amount to the same thing." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Evelyn watched emotions flicker across his face. Anger, frustration, something that might have been shame. It was the most human she'd seen him look, this man who usually wore his coldness like armor. "That's not right," he said finally. "No, sir, but it's reality. Reality can be changed. Not by people like me, sir. We don't have that power." Evelyn stood, smoothing her apron with nervous hands. "I should get back to work. I'm sorry for overstepping." She moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Carter," he paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Do you like working here?" The question was so unexpected that Evelyn answered truthfully before she could think better of it. "It's the best position I've ever had, sir. Mrs. Patterson is fair, the pay is good, and I'm able to send money home to my mother. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you like it." Evelyn turned back to face him, finding herself drawn into conversation despite knowing how dangerous it was. "Does anyone truly like being in service, sir? It's honest work, and I'm glad to have it. But given the choice, I'd rather be many other things, such as a teacher. I want to teach children who don't have access to good schools. I want to show them that education can open doors." She heard herself speaking with a passion she usually kept carefully hidden. "I'm saving money for teachers' college. Another 2 years and I might have enough." Something shifted in Alexander's expression. The coldness she was used to seeing melted slightly, revealing genuine interest beneath. A noble ambition. "It's just practical, sir. Someone needs to educate our children." "Our children," he repeated. "You draw clear lines between us and them. Life has drawn those lines, sir. I'm just honest enough to acknowledge them. And if someone wanted to blur those lines, to cross them?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that made Evelyn's pulse race with equal parts fear and something she didn't want to name. She saw it in his eyes now, the same dangerous interest Martha had warned her about. But unlike the predatory attention she'd experienced from other men, this felt different. It felt like recognition, like two people seeing each other across an impossible divide and wondering what might exist on the other side. "Then that person would be a fool, sir," Evelyn said quietly but firmly. "Those lines exist for reasons. Crossing them destroys lives, especially lives like mine." "What if—" Alexander began, but the sound of voices in the hallway cut him off. Evelyn grabbed her cleaning supplies with practiced speed, instantly transforming back into the invisible servant. By the time Mrs. Ashford swept into the music room with 2 society friends, Evelyn was dusting a bookshelf with downcast eyes, while Alexander stood by the window, looking out at the ocean, as if he'd been there all along. "Alexander, darling, there you are," his mother said with false brightness. "We've been looking everywhere for you. Mrs. Thornton and Mrs. Blackwell have brought their daughter Charlotte for tea. She's so eager to see you again." Evelyn didn't look up, but she felt the tension in the room shift. She heard Alexander's cold, formal voice return as he greeted the women with practiced politeness. She heard the thinly veiled matchmaking attempts as Mrs. Ashford orchestrated them toward the terrace for tea. And she heard the moment when Alexander's footsteps paused at the doorway, and she knew without looking that he'd glanced back at her before leaving. That night, unable to sleep in the small room she shared with 2 other maids, Evelyn sat by the window and looked out at the moonlit ocean. The servants' quarters were on the third floor, with a view of the water that the family probably never even thought about. Up here, in these cramped rooms with thin walls and shared facilities, lived the invisible army that kept the mansion running. Martha slept soundly in the bed across from her, but Sarah Chen, the Chinese maid who occupied the third bed, was also awake, reading by candlelight. "Can't sleep either?" Sarah asked quietly in her accented English. She'd been in America for 5 years, working her way up from laundry to housemaid. "Too much on my mind," Evelyn admitted. "The master's been watching you," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "Be careful. Men like him, they don't understand that their interest can ruin us. They think because they have power they can do whatever they want without consequences. But we're the ones who suffer the consequences." "I know. Martha told me the same thing." "Good. Then maybe you'll listen." Sarah closed her book. "I worked in another house before this one. The master's son took interest in one of the maids. She thought he cared about her. She thought he might even marry her, if you can believe such foolishness. Instead, when she got with child, she was thrown out without references. Last I heard, she was working in a factory. Her baby left with relatives, her life destroyed. The son? He married a rich girl 6 months later like nothing had happened." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "That won't happen to me. I won't let it." "Good. Because men like Mr. Ashford, they're the most dangerous kind. They seem different, seem like they might actually care, but in the end, they always choose their own kind. And we're left to pick up the pieces." The next few days were torture. Evelyn tried to avoid Alexander, but in a house where she was required to serve meals, clean common rooms, and attend to various household duties, complete avoidance was impossible. And worse, he seemed to be everywhere, reading in the library when she came to dust, walking in the garden when she hung laundry, appearing in the dining room at odd hours when she was polishing silver. Their interactions remained professionally appropriate. He never touched her, never said anything overtly inappropriate, but the way he looked at her spoke volumes, and the way her heart responded terrified her. "You need to request a transfer," Martha told her one afternoon as they prepared vegetables in the kitchen. "Ask Mrs. Patterson to assign you to work only in the family's private quarters when Mr. Alexander is out. Make excuses. Anything to avoid being alone with him." "I haven't done anything wrong," Evelyn protested, though she knew Martha was right. "Doesn't matter what you've done. It's what people think, and what they'll say. The other servants are already talking. Mr. Whitmore," she referred to the butler, "has noticed, and if Mr. Whitmore notices, you can bet Mrs. Ashford will hear about it soon enough." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Mrs. Patterson appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Evelyn, you're needed in the study. Mr. Alexander has requested additional firewood. The ocean wind makes the room cold." Evelyn's hands stilled on the potato she was peeling. It was June. The weather was warm. There was no reason for a fire in the study. Martha gave her a significant look but said nothing. There was no refusing a direct request from the family. Evelyn found Alexander alone in the study, and there was indeed no fire in the fireplace. He stood by the window again. He seemed to favor that position, looking out at the late afternoon light on the water. "You requested firewood, sir?" Evelyn kept her voice neutral, professional. "No." He turned to face her. "I requested to speak with you privately. I apologize for the deception, but it seemed the only way." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to flee before whatever was about to happen could ruin her carefully constructed life. "Sir, this isn't appropriate." "I know. Nothing about this is appropriate." He took a step closer and she forced herself not to retreat. "But I find I can't stop thinking about our conversation in the music room, about what you said regarding lines and boundaries." "I meant what I said, sir. Those lines exist for good reason. Do they? Or do they exist because people are too afraid to question them? Fear and wisdom often look the same from certain angles, sir." That almost smile appeared on his face again, the one that transformed his cold features into something warmer. "You're remarkably well-spoken for someone who claims to have only church education. My mother was a teacher before she married. She made sure I could read and think." Evelyn lifted her chin slightly. "Being in service doesn't make a person stupid, sir. Just poor. I never thought you stupid. Quite the opposite." He moved to his desk, putting physical distance between them as if he also recognized the danger of proximity. "I want to hire you a tutor." The words were so unexpected that Evelyn wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry, sir." "For music. For your other studies. You said you want to attend teacher's college. I can help with that." He spoke quickly as if afraid she'd interrupt. "I'll arrange for instructors to come here during your free hours. Music, literature, mathematics, whatever you need to prepare for entrance examinations." Evelyn stared at him, emotions warring inside her. Gratitude, suspicion, hope, fear. Why would you do that? Because you have potential that's being wasted dusting furniture and polishing silver. Because talent should be nurtured regardless of circumstance. Because, he paused, and something vulnerable crossed his face. Because talking to you is the first time in years I've felt like I was speaking to an actual human being, instead of a social obligation or business opportunity. The honesty in those words struck Evelyn like a physical blow. She saw past the cold exterior then, glimpsed the lonely, damaged man beneath, and that terrified her more than anything else because it made him human. It made him real. Sir, I appreciate the offer truly, but I can't accept. Why not? Because there's no such thing as a gift without strings. The words came out harsher than she intended. I've seen what happens when men from your world offer help to women from mine. The price is always higher than advertised. Anger flashed across Alexander's face. Not at her, she realized, but at what her words implied. I'm not proposing anything inappropriate. These would be legitimate lessons with qualified instructors. You'd never be alone with me. Everything completely professional and above reproach. And when the lessons are over, when I've learned everything your instructors can teach, what then? Evelyn met his eyes directly, all pretense of servant deference abandoned. Do you keep me here as some kind of educated curiosity? Do you expect gratitude that goes beyond appropriate bounds? Or do I leave with skills that no household will hire me for because I'm too educated to be a maid but not accepted anywhere else? You'd have your teacher's college preparation. You could leave service entirely. With what references? With what explanation for why the wealthy Alexander Ashford took such interest in his black maid's education? She shook her head. Sir, I know you mean well. I think you genuinely want to help. But your kindness would destroy my life more surely than cruelty ever could. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. Alexander looked at her with an expression that mixed frustration, understanding, and something deeper that neither of them could acknowledge. What if I don't care about the scandal? He said quietly. Then you're even more dangerous than I thought, Evelyn replied. Because you have the luxury of not caring. I don't. My mother depends on my wages. My younger sister needs money for her education. I have responsibilities that your interest, however genuine, threatens. She moved toward the door, needing to end this before her treacherous heart convinced her to stay. Please, sir, if you have any real concern for my welfare, forget about tutors and lessons and whatever else you're imagining. Let me do my work, earn my wages, and pursue my dreams in my own way. That's the only help I can accept. She left before he could respond, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. Behind her, she heard Alexander say her name once, softly, but she didn't turn back. That evening, as Evelyn lay in bed listening to Martha's snoring and Sarah's quiet breathing, she wondered if she'd made the right choice. Part of her yearned for those lessons, for the opportunity to learn from real instructors to accelerate her path to teacher's college. But a deeper, wiser part knew she'd done what was necessary, because the real danger wasn't the lessons themselves. It was the fact that she was starting to care about Alexander Ashford, not as an employer or a distant wealthy figure, but as a man, a complicated, damaged, lonely man, who looked at her like she mattered, and in the world they lived in, that kind of caring could only lead to heartbreak. Outside, the ocean crashed against the rocks with relentless persistence, a sound that would continue long after all their individual dramas had been forgotten. But for now, in this moment, Evelyn Carter lay awake and wondered what it would be like to live in a world where lines didn't exist, where a black maid and a wealthy white industrialist could simply be two people trying to connect across the void of human loneliness. It was a dangerous dream, and dreams like that had a way of destroying the dreamers. The summer storm that rolled in from the Atlantic 3 weeks after Evelyn's conversation with Alexander seemed to mirror the growing tension inside the Ashford mansion. Thunder rattled the windows, while lightning illuminated the dark ocean in brilliant flashes. The servants moved through their duties with nervous efficiency, aware that storms made Mrs. Ashford irritable and prone to finding fault with everything. Evelyn had successfully avoided being alone with Alexander since their encounter in the study. She'd requested reassignment to the upper floors during morning hours when he typically occupied the common rooms, volunteered for kitchen duties during his usual reading time in the library, and generally made herself scarce whenever possible. Mrs. Patterson had given her curious looks, but hadn't questioned the changes. But avoidance could only work for so long in a house where every room eventually required attention. Evelyn, I need you to bring tea to Mr. Alexander's private sitting room, Mrs. Patterson said during the height of the storm. He's requested it specifically, and Mary's down with a fever. You're the only one available. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Perhaps one of the kitchen staff could. They're all occupied with dinner preparations. It's just tea, girl. 5 minutes at most. Mrs. Patterson's tone brooked no argument. Evelyn prepared the tea service with hands that trembled slightly. She told herself she was being ridiculous. It was just tea. She'd deliver it, exchange polite words, and leave. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous. But when she knocked on the sitting room door and entered at his bidding, she found Alexander standing by the window watching the storm, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp and the occasional flash of lightning. The intimate atmosphere made her pulse quicken with alarm. "Your tea, sir," she said formally, setting the tray on the table near the door, preparing for a quick exit. "Stay." The word was quiet but firm. "Please, I'd like to talk to you." "Sir, that's not appropriate." "I know what's appropriate and what isn't, Miss Carter. I'm simply asking for a conversation. You can leave the door open if it makes you more comfortable." Evelyn hesitated, torn between professional obligation and self-preservation. The rain hammered against the windows with increasing violence. Thunder boomed so loudly the floor seemed to shake. 5 minutes, she said finally, leaving the door slightly ajar. "That's all I can give without causing talk." Alexander turned from the window, and in the lamplight she saw that he looked different, more disheveled than usual. His hair slightly mussed, his shirt collar loosened. The whiskey glass suggested he'd been drinking for a while. Not drunk, but definitely less controlled than his usual careful composure. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began without preamble, "about lines and boundaries and the price of crossing them. You were right, of course. You're almost always right in our conversations." "Sir, I really shouldn't—" "My father beat my younger brother," Alexander interrupted, the words coming out harsh and sudden like he'd been holding them back too long. "Regularly, viciously, called it discipline, building character. My mother knew but did nothing because that's what women of her class do. They look away and pretend everything is fine as long as the social facade remains intact." Evelyn froze, shocked by this sudden confession. This wasn't the conversation she'd expected. "I was away at school when it got really bad," Alexander continued, his voice rough with old pain. "Then the war came, and I volunteered thinking I was being noble, serving my country. When I came back, Thomas, my brother, was dead. They said it was influenza, but I knew better. I saw the empty bottles in his room, saw the prescription medicines he'd been taking to escape. He couldn't live with the pain anymore, and I wasn't there to protect him." Lightning flashed, illuminating the anguish on Alexander's face before plunging the room back into shadow. "Sir, I'm sorry for your loss, but I don't understand why you're telling me this," Evelyn said softly. "Because you asked me once what made me the way I am. This is the answer." He set down the whiskey glass with a sharp click. "I learned in the war that feeling anything makes you vulnerable. I watched my closest friend die in my arms in a trench in France, watched him bleed out while I couldn't do anything to save him. Then I came home to find my brother had destroyed himself because no one cared enough to truly see his pain." He moved closer, and Evelyn's breath caught. "So I stopped feeling, stopped caring. It was easier that way, safer. I became exactly what society expected. A cold, successful businessman who treats life like a ledger book. No attachments, no vulnerabilities, no weaknesses. Until," Evelyn found herself asking despite knowing she shouldn't encourage this conversation, "until you broke a vase and looked at me with honesty instead of fear or calculation?" His eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. "Until you played piano and spoke about dreams with passion I haven't heard in years. Until you made me realize that what I thought was strength was actually just cowardice. Hiding from life because living actually requires courage." "Mr. Ashford," Alexander, Evelyn stumbled over his name, something she'd never said aloud before. "This can't happen. Whatever you think you feel, whatever connection you believe exists between us, it can't exist. Not in this world. Then maybe the world needs to change." "The world doesn't change for people like me." The words burst out with more emotion than she'd intended. "The world breaks people like me who dare to dream above their station. I've seen it happen. My aunt worked for a wealthy family in Philadelphia. The son took interest in her, made her believe he cared. When she became pregnant, she was thrown out without references or support. She died in childbirth in a charity hospital while he married a senator's daughter. That's reality. That's what happens when our worlds collide." Alexander flinched as if she'd struck him. "I would never—" "You say that now, but what happens when your family threatens to cut you off? When society turns against you? When business partners refuse to work with you because you've crossed lines that can't be uncrossed?" Evelyn's voice shook with frustration and fear. "You have the luxury of grand gestures and noble sentiments. I have rent to pay, a mother who depends on me. Dreams that require every penny I can save. I can't afford your interest, no matter how genuine it feels. Thunder crashed directly overhead, so loud it seemed the sky itself was splitting apart. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by lightning flashes. I should go, Evelyn said, moving toward where she remembered the door being, but Alexander's voice stopped her. I'm transferring a significant sum of money into an account for you, enough to cover teachers' college tuition, living expenses, everything you need. Evelyn spun around, though she could barely see him in the darkness. Absolutely not. I won't accept your money. It's not charity. Consider it payment for teaching me something valuable, that the ice I've been living in wasn't protection, it was a prison. I taught you nothing, and I won't be bought, Mr. Ashford. She used his formal name deliberately, trying to re-establish the boundaries that were crumbling around them. Whatever guilt you're feeling about your brother, whatever loneliness drives this fixation on me, money won't solve it, and it certainly won't change the fundamental impossibility of what you're suggesting. The lights flickered back on, revealing Alexander's face etched with frustration and something that looked heartbreakingly like hope, struggling against reality. I'm not suggesting anything beyond helping you achieve your goals, he said, but they both knew he was lying. The air between them was charged with more than the storm's electricity. Then help me by letting me go, Evelyn said quietly. Let me do my work, save my money the honest way, and leave here without complications. That's the only help that won't destroy me. She left before he could respond, practically running down the hallway, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard something crash, glass breaking, perhaps the whiskey tumbler thrown against the wall in frustration, but she didn't turn back. The next morning brought more than just clear skies after the storm. It brought Mrs. Ashford's announcement at breakfast that she was hosting a grand party in 2 weeks, a midsummer celebration that would bring together Newport's entire social elite. We need to remind society that the Ashford name still commands respect, Eleanor Ashford declared to her son over breakfast. Evelyn, serving coffee, heard every word. Especially after that unfortunate business with Catherine Vandermeer. People are talking, Alexander. They're saying you're unmarriageable, that you're too cold to maintain a proper relationship. Let them talk, Alexander said flatly, not looking up from his newspaper. I will not let them talk. You're 32 years old and it's time you settled down properly. I've invited several suitable young women to the party. You will dance with them, charm them, and select at least one for serious courtship. I'm not a prize horse being shown at auction, Mother. No, you're an Ashford, and that comes with responsibilities. Eleanor's voice carried the steel that had made her a force in Newport society for decades. The Berkshire girl would be perfect. Good family, substantial dowry, and she's desperate enough after 2 failed seasons that she won't be particular about your cold demeanor. Evelyn's hands tightened on the coffee pot. She shouldn't care about this conversation. It had nothing to do with her, but she found herself holding her breath, waiting for Alexander's response. I'll attend your party, Mother, but I make no promises about courtship. You'll do more than attend. You'll participate properly, or I'll cut off your access to your grandmother's trust fund. Don't test me on this, Alexander. The threat hung in the air. Evelyn quickly finished serving and retreated to the kitchen, where Martha was preparing vegetables with unusual vigor, a sign she was agitated about something. You heard about the party? Martha asked without preamble. Just now. Sounds like it will be a lot of work for all of us. That's not what I'm worried about. Martha set down her knife and fixed Evelyn with a serious look. Mr. Whitmore pulled me aside this morning. There's been talk among the staff about you and Mr. Alexander. Evelyn's blood ran cold. There's nothing to talk about. I serve him tea occasionally, that's all. That's not how people are seeing it. Sarah mentioned to one of the gardeners that she'd seen Mr. Alexander watching you. The gardener told the stable master, who mentioned it to Mr. Whitmore. You know how gossip spreads in a house like this. But nothing has happened. I've been completely professional. Doesn't matter. The appearance of impropriety is enough. Martha's expression was grim. Mr. Whitmore wants me to warn you. He's loyal to Mrs. Ashford, and if she gets wind of this gossip, she'll dismiss you without references. Doesn't matter if you're innocent. She'll eliminate any potential scandal before it starts. Evelyn sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong. I know that, you know that. But that's not how this works. Martha sat beside her, taking her hand. You need to request a transfer to a different household. I have connections. I can get you a position with a family in Boston. Good people, fair employers. You leave before this gets worse. I can't leave. I need this job. The pay here is better than anywhere else, and I'm so close to having enough saved. Better to start over somewhere else than be dismissed without references. That would destroy any chance of future employment in decent households. Before Evelyn could respond, Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway. "Evelyn, Mrs. Ashford wants to see you in her private sitting room." Immediately, the walk to Eleanor Ashford's sitting room felt like a march to execution. Evelyn's mind raced through possible scenarios, all of them bad. Had Mrs. Ashford heard the gossip? Was she being dismissed? Would she lose everything she'd worked for because of conversations she'd never asked for? Eleanor Ashford sat at her writing desk, perfectly composed in an expensive morning dress, her silver hair styled immaculately. She didn't look up when Evelyn entered. "Close the door and sit down," Eleanor said, her tone neither warm nor cold, simply businesslike. Evelyn obeyed, perching on the edge of an elegant chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Eleanor finally looked up, her sharp eyes assessing Evelyn with the same calculation she might use when evaluating a piece of furniture. "You're wondering why I hired you." The statement was so unexpected that Evelyn could only nod. "I hired you because you're intelligent, educated beyond your circumstances, and beautiful in an unusual way. I hired you specifically to catch my son's attention." Evelyn felt the floor drop out from under her. "Ma'am, I don't understand." "Don't play stupid, it doesn't suit you." Eleanor stood and moved to the window, her posture rigid. "My son has been dead inside since the war. Oh, he functions, runs the business, maintains social appearances, but there's nothing behind his eyes. No passion, no life, no genuine emotion. I thought perhaps if he encountered someone completely different from the vapid society girls who bore him, someone with real substance, it might wake something in him. So I was bait?" Evelyn's voice came out strangled. "An experiment," Eleanor corrected. "One that appears to have worked better than I anticipated. He looks at you the way he hasn't looked at anything in years. You've made him feel something, which was my goal. However," her voice hardened, "I never intended for things to progress beyond that initial awakening. I certainly never intended for actual attachment to develop." Evelyn stood abruptly, anger flooding through her shock. "You used me. You manipulated both of us like pieces on a chessboard. I'm a mother trying to save her son from the prison he's built for himself. Yes, I used you, and I'd do it again if it meant bringing him back to life." Eleanor turned to face her directly. "But now we have a problem. The staff is gossiping. Society will hear about it, and if this continues, it will destroy both of you. Him socially and professionally, you personally and economically. I haven't encouraged him. I've done everything possible to avoid—" "I know. I've been watching." Eleanor's expression softened slightly, "which is why I'm not dismissing you. Instead, I'm making you an offer. A substantial one." She moved to her desk and withdrew an envelope. "Inside this envelope is a check for $5,000 and a letter of reference that will secure you employment in any household in America. Enough money for your teacher's college, your mother's needs, your sister's education, and more. Take it. Leave Newport tonight and never contact my son again." Evelyn stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. $5,000 was more money than she'd see in 5 years of work. It was everything she needed, everything she'd been dreaming of: freedom, education, security. But accepting it meant validating Eleanor's manipulation. It meant admitting that she was something that could be bought and dismissed. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly. "Then I'll have you dismissed without references for inappropriate behavior with my son. I'll make sure every household in Newport and beyond knows you were terminated for crossing boundaries with your employer. You'll never work in a decent home again. Your dreams of teacher's college will die and you'll end up in a factory or worse." The threat was delivered calmly, without malice, simply a statement of fact about the power Eleanor wielded. "Why are you doing this?" Evelyn asked, her voice breaking slightly. "You brought me here. You created this situation. Because I made a mistake. I thought I could control the variables, but I underestimated how much my son would care. And I underestimated you. I thought you'd be flattered by his attention, perhaps even try to manipulate him for your own gain. Instead, you've been honorable to a fault." Eleanor's expression was almost regretful. "In another world, another life, you might have been perfect for him, but not in this one. In this world, caring for each other will destroy you both." Evelyn looked at the envelope, then at Eleanor Ashford's implacable face. She thought about her mother working herself to exhaustion back in Baltimore, about her sister who wanted to attend the new black college but couldn't afford it, about her own dreams of teaching that had sustained her through years of hard labor. She thought about Alexander's face when he'd told her about his brother, about the vulnerability she'd glimpsed beneath his cold exterior. She thought about how her heart raced when he entered a room, how she'd started to care about him despite every logical reason not to, and she thought about what Martha and Sarah had told her. The stories of women who'd believed that love could transcend circumstances, who'd paid terrible prices for that belief. "I need time to think," Evelyn said finally. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the offer expires, and the threats become reality." Eleanor returned to her desk, effectively dismissing Evelyn. "Choose wisely, Miss Carter, for both your sakes." Evelyn left the room in a daze, clutching the envelope she hadn't yet opened. She moved through her afternoon duties mechanically, her mind spinning with impossible choices. That evening she found Alexander in the library. She'd made the decision to tell him everything, about his mother's confession, about the offer, about the impossible situation they'd found themselves in, through no real fault of their own. But when she entered the library, she found him standing with a woman she'd never seen before. Tall, elegant, blonde, dressed in the latest fashion. The woman's hand rested possessively on Alexander's arm while she laughed at something he'd said. "Oh, you must be one of the maids," the woman said, noticing Evelyn. Her tone was pleasant but dismissive, the way one might greet a piece of furniture. "We'll need fresh tea brought up, please. Alexander and I have so much to discuss about the upcoming party." Alexander's eyes met Evelyn's across the room. In that moment she saw everything. His frustration, his resignation, his mother's invisible hand pushing him toward this acceptable woman who would never challenge him or make him feel anything real. She saw the future laid out clearly, him married to someone suitable, living his cold, empty life, her dismissed and destroyed if she tried to fight against the inevitable tide of society's expectations. "Of course, ma'am," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the pain crushing her chest. "I'll bring tea immediately." She retreated before Alexander could speak, before her composure could crack completely. That night, Evelyn sat with the unopened envelope in her small room while Martha and Sarah slept. Outside, the ocean continued its endless rhythm against the shore. Inside, her heart made a decision her mind knew was necessary but devastating. She would take Eleanor Ashford's offer. She would leave Newport, pursue her teaching dreams, and never look back. She would choose survival over sentiment, practicality over impossible hope. But first she needed to say goodbye, not to Alexander. That would be too dangerous, too final, but to the dream she'd briefly allowed herself to entertain, the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, the lines that divided their worlds weren't as permanent as everyone claimed. She opened the envelope. The check was there, as promised. So was the glowing reference letter that would open doors anywhere she wanted to go. Freedom purchased with heartbreak. Tomorrow she would accept the offer and begin the process of leaving. She would do what was necessary, what was smart, what would secure her future, and protect her from the destruction that caring for Alexander Ashford would inevitably bring. But tonight, just for tonight, she let herself cry for what could never be. Dawn broke over Newport with deceptive beauty, golden light painting the ocean, gulls crying their morning songs, the promise of another perfect summer day. But inside the servants' quarters of the Ashford mansion, Evelyn Carter packed her few belongings with hands that moved mechanically, her decision made but her heart still breaking. She'd written a brief letter to Alexander, sealed it, and left it with Martha to deliver after she'd gone. In it, she'd explained nothing and everything, that she was leaving for her own good, that his mother's offer had provided the opportunity she needed, that he should forget her and live the life he was born to live. What she didn't write was that she'd fallen in love with him despite every effort not to, that admitting it, even to herself, felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. "You're doing the right thing," Martha said quietly, helping fold Evelyn's spare uniform. "It hurts now, but you'll thank yourself later when you're teaching children and living your real life." "I know," Evelyn replied, though the words tasted like ash. The plan was simple. She'd leave before the household fully woke, take the early train to Boston, and begin her new life with the resources Mrs. Ashford had provided. Clean break, no dramatic goodbyes, no chances for second thoughts. But as she descended the servants' stairs with her small suitcase, she heard raised voices coming from the study, Alexander's and his mother's, both sharp with anger. "You had no right!" Alexander's voice carried a fury Evelyn had never heard from him. "You manipulated both of us like we were puppets for your entertainment. I did what was necessary to wake you from your living death," Eleanor shot back. "And it worked, didn't it? You're feeling something for the first time in years. My only mistake was underestimating how deeply you'd care. She's leaving because of you, because you've made it impossible for her to stay without destroying her future. I've given her a future, $5,000 in references that will take her anywhere she wants to go. I've been more generous than most would be in my position." "Generous?" Alexander's laugh was bitter. "You've bought her silence and compliance the way you've bought everything else in your life. But you can't buy genuine human connection, Mother. You can't purchase what she and I found despite every obstacle you and society placed in our way. Evelyn froze on the stairs, torn between fleeing and staying to hear more. What you found was impossible and dangerous, Eleanor said, her voice softening slightly. Alexander, I understand you care for her. I even respect it. She's extraordinary, and in another world, another time, perhaps things could be different. But not in this world. Not now. Caring for her will destroy her life and yours. Is that what you want? To drag her down with you when society inevitably tears you both apart? Silence followed, heavy with unspoken truths. What I want, Alexander said finally, his voice raw, is to stop being the man you and Father and this whole society created. Cold, controlled, emotionally dead. Evelyn made me remember what it feels like to be human, and you're taking that away. I'm saving you both from a catastrophe. Someday you'll understand. Evelyn couldn't listen anymore. She moved quickly toward the side entrance, needing to escape before anyone saw her, before her resolve crumbled completely. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As she stepped outside into the golden morning, she nearly collided with Alexander, who'd apparently left the study through another door. They stood frozen, staring at each other, her suitcase between them like a physical manifestation of the distance that was about to become permanent. You're leaving, he said flatly, right now, without even saying goodbye. It's better this way. Evelyn's voice was steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Quick, clean. No prolonged goodbyes that make this harder than it needs to be. Harder? Something desperate flickered across his face. Evelyn, don't go. Please. We can figure this out. There's nothing to figure out. Your mother was right about everything. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to say what needed to be said. We live in different worlds, Alexander. Worlds that don't overlap, no matter how much we might wish they did. You have responsibilities, expectations, a future mapped out by generations of your family. I have dreams that require me to be practical, not romantic. What if I don't care about any of that? What if I walked away from all of it? Then you'd be a fool. The words came out harsher than intended, and you'd eventually resent me for it. Men like you don't walk away from everything, not permanently. You might think you could now in this moment, but reality would catch up. You'd miss your lifestyle, your status, your world. And I'd be the person who took it all away. You don't know that. Yes, I do. I've seen it happen. I've heard the stories. Evelyn shifted her suitcase, preparing to leave. Please don't make this harder. Let me go with dignity, with the resources your mother provided, with a chance at the future I've been working toward. Alexander reached for her hand and she let him take it. One final contact, one last moment of connection before the inevitable separation. I'm in love with you, he said simply. I didn't want to be. Fought against it with everything I had, but I am. And I hope, you feel the same way. Evelyn closed her eyes against the pain of hearing what she'd longed to hear at exactly the wrong moment. It doesn't matter what I feel. Love isn't enough, Alexander. Not in the real world. Not when the cost is everything we've both worked for. Then what is enough? What would make this possible? Nothing. That's the truth you need to accept. She gently pulled her hand from his. Go back inside. Attend your mother's party. Court the suitable women she's selected, build the life you're supposed to have, and let me build mine. Separate from yours. She walked away before he could respond, before her resolve could shatter completely, her vision blurred with tears she couldn't afford to shed. Not yet. Not where anyone could see. Behind her she heard Alexander call her name once, desperately, but she didn't turn back. The train station was a 15-minute walk. Evelyn focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on the weight of her suitcase, on anything except the ache in her chest that felt like it might consume her entirely. She'd almost reached the station when she heard running footsteps behind her, but it wasn't Alexander. It was Martha, out of breath and looking panicked. Evelyn, wait. You need to come back. Martha, I can't. I've made my decision. It's not about you and Mr. Alexander. Martha grabbed her arm. It's Mrs. Ashford. She's collapsed. They're calling for doctors and the household is in chaos. She's asking for you specifically. Said she needs to speak with you before. Martha's voice caught. They think it might be her heart. Evelyn stood frozen, torn between self-preservation and basic human decency. Whatever Eleanor Ashford had done, however she'd manipulated circumstances, she was still a human being, possibly facing her final moments. Please, Martha urged. Whatever happened between you all, she's dying. Don't let her die with this on her conscience. The walk back to the mansion was surreal. Servants rushed about, a doctor's car sat in the driveway, and Alexander stood on the front steps looking like his carefully controlled world had shattered completely. His eyes met hers as she approached. She asked for you. I don't know why, but she's insisting. Evelyn climbed the stairs past him, through the chaos, to Eleanor Ashford's bedroom. The elegant, powerful woman who'd sat so confidently in her sitting room yesterday now lay pale and fragile against white pillows, breathing shallowly, a doctor monitoring her pulse. Miss Carter is here, ma'am, the nurse said softly. Eleanor's eyes opened, focusing on Evelyn with effort. She gestured weakly for everyone else to leave. When they were alone, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. I was wrong, Eleanor said, about so many things, but especially about you and my son. Mrs. Ashford, you should rest. No time for rest, listen. Eleanor's hand reached out and Evelyn found herself taking it. I've spent my life trying to control everything. My husband's cruelty, my son's emptiness, the social machinery that runs our world. But some things can't be controlled. Some things are real despite being impossible. She paused, gathering strength. The check I gave you, it's yours regardless of what you choose. But I'm also giving you something else. She gestured to the nightstand. Open the drawer. Inside was another envelope, this one containing legal documents. That's a deed to a property in Philadelphia, a respectable house in a good neighborhood, and documents establishing you as a private tutor hired by the Ashford family, with legitimate employment history that will satisfy any scrutiny. Eleanor's breathing was labored. If you choose to be with Alexander, you'll have independence, respectability, resources, not as much as if you were born to his world, but enough to build a life together without destroying each other. Evelyn stared at the documents, stunned. Why are you doing this? Because I've seen what living without love does to a person. My husband was cruel because his father was cruel before him. I enabled it because I thought maintaining appearances was more important than genuine happiness. And I raised a son who learned that feeling nothing was safer than feeling everything. Tears slid down Eleanor's cheeks. I don't want that legacy to continue. I want Alexander to have what I never had. Real love, even if it breaks every social rule I've spent my life upholding. But society will gossip and condemn, yes. You'll both face obstacles, discrimination, challenges I can't even imagine. It won't be easy. Eleanor squeezed Evelyn's hand with surprising strength. But my son is alive again because of you. Really alive, not just existing. That's worth more than all the social approval in the world. The doctor knocked and entered. Mrs. Ashford, you need to rest now. The medication will help, but you must not exert yourself. Eleanor nodded, but kept her eyes on Evelyn. The choice is yours. Take the money and build your life separately. That's still valid and good. Or take the documents and build something together. Either way, you have my blessing and my apology. Evelyn left the room in a daze, clutching the new envelope. Outside the door, Alexander waited, his face etched with worry and hope and fear. What did she say? He asked. Evelyn handed him the envelope, watched his eyes widen as he read the contents, saw understanding dawn followed by something that looked like desperate hope. She's giving us a chance, he said softly. A real chance with resources and respectability. It won't be perfect, but it won't be easy, Evelyn interrupted. We'll face prejudice, social exile, constant challenges. Your business partners might abandon you. Society women will cut us both, and we'll be pioneers in territory that's dangerous and unmarked. I know, Alexander moved closer, but I've spent years being safe, being controlled, being what everyone expected, and I was dead inside, Evelyn. You brought me back to life. If I let you walk away now, I'll spend the rest of my existence regretting it. Evelyn looked at the man before her. No longer the cold, distant Duke, but a human being willing to risk everything for genuine connection. She thought about the easy path, teacher's college, a respectable career, safety, and she thought about the hard path, love without guarantees, challenges without end, building something new in a world hostile to their very existence. I'm terrified, she admitted. So am I. We might fail. This might destroy us both. It might, Alexander agreed. Or it might be the best decision either of us ever makes. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on her. Then she thought about how she felt when Alexander looked at her, seen, valued, fully human. She thought about the possibility of building something real, even if it was hard. If we do this, she said carefully, we do it as equals, not employer and servant, not benefactor and recipient, partners who respect each other's dreams and support each other's goals. Agreed. And I still attend teacher's college. I still pursue my education. That's non-negotiable. I wouldn't want it any other way. Evelyn smiled then, genuinely, for the first time since this whole impossible situation began. Then I suppose we're about to scandalize all of Newport society. and probably most of the eastern seaboard, Alexander added with that almost smile that transformed his face. He reached for her hand, and this time she took it without hesitation. They stood together in the hallway of the mansion that had brought them together, facing an uncertain future with more courage than certainty. Outside, the summer sun continued its climb into a brilliant sky. Inside, Eleanor Ashford rested, her medication working, her conscience finally easing. And throughout the house, servants whispered about the impossible thing unfolding before their eyes. The path ahead would be difficult. There would be obstacles, prejudice, and challenges neither of them could fully anticipate, but they would face it together. Two people who'd found genuine connection across impossible divides, choosing love over convenience, courage over safety. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, it was something better, a realistic beginning to a difficult but worthy fight. And as Alexander and Evelyn walked together toward an uncertain but shared future, they both understood that some things, genuine human connection, real love, mutual respect, were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. The reckoning had come, and they'd both chosen truth over comfort, possibility over safety, and love over everything society said should matter more. It was enough.